All right, let's try this. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about good customer care on public transit and thinking about labor process and public transit organizations in Toronto, Canada, the TTC, Toronto Transit Commission, and Transport for London in London, UK. And these organizations are both centered around customer service. They have this increasing and emphasized reality which emphasizes customer service. Moving on to the next slide. So to understand how the labor process and customer service come together, I think about one of these bus rides that I had with the bus driver recently. And I remember the bus driver calling me up to the front, and I thought, oh no, I did something wrong. He immediately turns to me and says, hey buddy, button up your shirt. The ones around your tummy are open. And I had a little chuckle, made some comment that was incoherent about being a tired dad, turned around and had a big smile on my face. Now, how do we make sense of what just happened? Because in an environment that emphasizes good customer service, is this an expression of customer service? What is actually happening? When thinking about that moment, I think about something that one of my participants said to me in an interview. So I really enjoy being useful, it's validating, like I said. I am a small piece, but I help people get to work. I help people get home. I find on a daily basis, it's gratifying when somebody, comes to bus and they just make it on time and they're like, oh, I'm running late for work, right? That I'm able to help them get somewhere. I know when somebody makes the bus and they're like, oh yeah, you made my day. And it's a small piece, but it's gratifying. So how do we make sense of this in terms of this phrasing, this language, and me buttoning up my shirt within the context of labor process theory? And to advance or to figure this out and to take account for this, I sort of make three claims in this paper. Firstly, that customer service orientation, so if you'll move to the next slide, slide 3, customer service orientation operates as a discourse to control workers as per Braverman's control argument, the controlling of workers' labor capacities. And what's interesting to see is through these interviews is that I saw that workers operated through this customer service orientation, but also simultaneously contest it. And what we saw as a result, or what I saw, is a care ethic being employed to contest this form of cultural control and the techniques of control in the labor process. So all of this begs the question, what is customer service anyway? So the way I approach this work as part of my broader dissertation work is I use an ethnographic sensibility. And for this paper in particular, I focused on select interviews with current and former staff and union officials associated with these organizations. And specifically, what I was trying to do is examine the organizational culture to understand how members of a particular culture interpret and make do with the culture they are a part of. And so what this is a form of ethnographic approach that gets at the inside of a culture and how members of a culture understand and interpret it. Now, to provide you with some more context on these two organizations, I'm looking at Transport for London, which is the transportation authority in Greater London in the UK. It is responsible for managing things like the congestion charge, cycling, London buses, the London Underground, Crossrail. So a vast array of services for a massive population. And of course, the TTC. The TTC is the Toronto Transit Commission in Toronto, Canada. It is a largely unionized workforce with one overwhelming union that is associated with its workers. The service is largely and overwhelmingly delivered publicly, whereas Transport for London, on the other hand, is a patchwork of different services. London Underground, the subway network, is publicly delivered. On the other hand, buses are sent out to contract to different bus companies. Now, both of these organizations are operating within that austerity context, rising fares, less fees, higher fees for service use. And both of these organizations focus on customer service. Now, what's interesting in both of these cases is that the language of the customer is something that's not limited to the past, 20 or 30 years and its emphasization there. Both organizations have used the language of the customer since as early as the 1920s and the 1930s, and you can find this information in annual reports from the organizations and their internal staff magazines. And both organizations have historic connections to private firms. And along these lines, we think about the context in which all this is occurring is new public management and the reinvention of public services, all within this neoliberal milieu. Now, some of the key ideas I draw from in this paper are looking at, of course, Braverman and the controlling of workers by that managerial class that Steph was talking about, and focusing on how that laboring capacity is used and deployed to create an outcome, the results orientation, as we might think of it. I also look at or think about alienation, about Friedman and the distinction between direct control and responsible autonomy, Buravoy and thinking about making out and games that are played, and as well as Hochschild, who talks about emotional labor, work that, or the emotion work that is, or sorry, the emotional management that is done for the realization of profit versus, emotion work, which Sharon Bolton talks about as the thing that is genuinely authentic that one does in relation to oneself. And of course, I think about all of this in relation to Foucault and Hall. When I think about customer service, I think of it as a discourse, the bounds within which we can talk and act and practice customer service, which also identify the rules for permissible action. This operates within the framework of power knowledge, which highlights for us that the way we know workers and the way in which customer service makes workers known allows for power to operate. And at the same time, I think about this in terms of governmentality and its neoliberal version, in thinking about how people are used to manage their own conduct and each other's conduct, right? And how customer service operates through this. Regardless, all of this, I think, is important to think about in terms of Stuart Hall's communication studies, seminal text on encoding, decoding. And when I think about discourse, what I think about in terms of encoding, decoding is that people ultimately have interpretive power, and that the meaning of a particular discourse is ultimately never entirely fixed, because we might operate on the terrain of a discourse, but the way in which we interpret it and talk about it and act in relation to it is what's left open for everyone. Now, all of this makes me think about it in terms of care and how workers employ care as a means to contest and disrupt customer service, and how they politicize it as well. And so when I look to the evidence and the communication with my participants, I think about how, for example, participants have noted that they do their own version of customer service. They provide good service, but they do it based on this idea of caring for others. So for example, one participant notes that he would drive his bus after the schedule. He would leave after the schedule. And that was to make sure that he got the last people coming on his bus from another vehicle on it. And so he would make up the time en route. But what happened to him, in fact, was that because he did that, a passenger got on the bus, complained to him, and then complained to his superintendent. The superintendent brought him to the office and said, "Are you delaying service?" So on the one hand, he is trying to provide good service, good customer service, but in doing so, customers say he is not performing good service, and you can see the effect of the labor process at work. The new manager is the customer. Right? Now, what he later says is that he then goes back to his own schedule after a while, and when he does that, the same woman who complained about him missed his bus because he left, or when he followed the rules of the superintendent and went on schedule, the woman who told him that he was leaving too late, well, she missed the bus. Oops. Moving on, thinking about this, workers have also talked about how they want more authority, but they want more authority because they want to take care of each other. And what they're also trying to say here, I think, is that, only workers know each other and the type of work that they do. And when they have the ability to care for each other, they can provide that better service. On TFL, some of the workers there have noted, for example, that, they keep talking to us about customer service. What they really mean is give us a smile. But customer service, as it really exists, is something that you do anyway when you're working on the rails. You're helping people get from one spot to another. And in another case, one of the workers have noted that actually you perform customer service by, giving good service to, angry customers who might engage in homophobic and racist acts. but you also show care for each other by making sure that those people, even though they can do good customer service, get in trouble later by, figuring out how to contact the cops after. So all of this leads me to my concluding points. Customer service might create the conditions for control and guiding work and action towards productive ends. But what I've also noticed is that workers also try and find ways to work within that customer service and also use competing ideas of customer care or care for others. And I think this creates a situation where we can see resistance and a movement from emotional labor for, results orientation to emotional work, where people are doing things and because of the love of the job and caring for others. And I think ultimately what all of this says to us is that, workers are trying to take control of the discourse through interpreting in practice. And ultimately, I think it's very important to think about because all of this refers to, I think, an infectious case of generosity and kindness. And I think when we're just a little bit more kinder to each other, it sort of has a power to create resistance towards these dominating ends that are accelerating managerial priorities, but in reality are creating the possibility for worker autonomy and care for each other in society in an increasingly alienated world. Okay, I'll leave it there.